Hello, welcome to this video all about the Annual Plan of Provision, or the APOP as we're calling it now. You'll know that from September 2025 all schools will need to have an Annual Plan of Provision or an APOP in place. And whilst it might feel like one of those documents that we have to go through or have to stick in our evidence folder or we just do for the sake of it, I actually think this is an amazing opportunity to make some really deliberate, really purposeful decisions about what we're providing for our young people and our communities when it comes to prayer and liturgy. You'll know that obviously in light of the Prayer and Liturgy Directory and our own diocesan document planning and celebrating prayer and liturgy with young people, there are a number of factors that we have said are really important and that we need to include. So the toolkit that I'm going to talk you through today is a planning approach that will lead you through all of those things, should tick all the boxes and make sure that the APOP you produce is not only fully in line with the CSI requirements and the Prayer and Liturgy Directory, but also our own diocesan approach to planning and creating this document. It's also our hope that in doing it really well now, in the weeks and months that build up to the start of September 2025, we'll actually create a living document that then becomes the foundation for really good provision going forward. It becomes a great document for evaluation, monitoring and review each academic year, so that every year we're moving our provision forward for our young people and our communities, because that's the point. None of these things, none of these resources are designed to make more work or just to tick another box. They're designed to make the prayer and liturgy we offer to our young people more engaging, more accessible, more enjoyable and more impactful. Because I firmly believe that in prayer and liturgy we have probably the best expression of what makes us different as Catholic, as faith schools. This is our USP, this is the stuff we do that no one else does. And when we do it really well, and when we do it in a way that works for all and is led and shaped by all, when we provide for all what they need, we can do something really quite meaningful, quite powerful and quite amazing. We can help young people, families, communities not just find faith for themselves, but also encounter Christ in new and meaningful ways. We can help them engage with both the contemporary and traditional practices of our church. And I think fundamentally, in a really good APOP and in our approach, certainly in our diocese, we can make sure that this invitation is open to everybody. Inclusion baked in right at its heart, so that everyone, wherever they are, whatever background they are, whatever faith perspective they come from, so that everyone can access something and take from the experience of prayer and liturgy throughout the school week and beyond something that makes a difference to their lives, that helps shape and form them, that helps inspire, and that helps them to grow. That's really what an APOP is an articulation of. What are we going to do deliberately and purposefully to make sure there's the opportunity for that encounter? So today we're going to go through what the various documents require us to have in our APOP, what we need to think about in terms of getting those sections right, and then how we put it all together into a document that other staff and other stakeholders can also use and rely upon to help drive provision forward. Just a bit of a, I suppose, spoiler alert, there isn't a kind of example one, there isn't one with all the bits filled in that says this is the right way of doing it, because the whole point of this is this needs to be written for and by your community. It should reflect you and what matters to you, and also where you are on your journey with prayer and liturgy. You might have practices that have been embedded for years, fantastic. You might have also just started doing things in a certain way for the first time this year, and so your APOP should be reflective of that. It needs to be unique to you. So that's why the approach we've got is to kind of tell you what things to think about, and then what you put in those sections will be really up to you and your different stakeholders and different people inputting into the process, so that what you end up with is reflective of who you are and your provision in your context. With that in mind then, please feel free to use this video and the resource as a staff meeting input. If you're watching in a staff meeting, hello, thank you. Please use it with your governing bodies, please use it with your key staff, with your leadership teams, please use it with your young people, because I firmly believe that a really good APOP should be collaboratively and co-responsibly created. only if we have the input of all the people this is for, will it be reflective of what it is we need to provide for them. So, looking at some of the original documents, looking at the Prayer and Liturgy Directory specifically, there are a few things that it says that we should make sure our APOP is. Again, it's very general. It doesn't provide specific detail about what it should look like, about what the different structures and bits should be. But what it does say is, first and foremost, it should be strategic and it should be cyclical. By that, it should help articulate some of the principles and some of the ideas that are going to underpin your practice. If you decide that actually we want to have a really big focus on seasonality, or we want to make sure that our week is balanced in terms of what different experiences there are for different groups, that's a strategic priority. How you do that will change each year depending on your monitoring, your evaluation, and the place that your community is in. Second of all, it obviously requires us to anchor what we do into the church's liturgical year. And that's kind of the point. We've always had a calendar, we've always had when we're doing stuff, and we've often always thought about when we do special things at special times. There are certain seasons we're really good at, and certain seasons which maybe we can play a bit more attention to, but the point is, we've always had a calendar, or a school calendar. What the APOP's asking us to do is to think about this more deliberately. How do we more explicitly tie into the church's liturgical year and all of its seasons, not just the ones we do really well? And how do we make sure things like feast days, like diocesan days, like patronal feast days for the saints of our schools or our hubs or our communities, how do we make sure they are marked? How do we then take it a step further to think about, well, where might be a good time for that retreat day? If we're doing a retreat day on vocations, maybe the week after Vocations Sunday during Eastertide might be a good time to put that. And how do we start not just looking at those prayer and liturgy opportunities, but also Catholic life and mission events, so that they also feed into that sense of seasonality? Anchoring into that liturgical year is really important. It also asks us to think about the more kind of short-term as well as the long-term expectations. What do our week looks like? What does it look like on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, Sunday, or evenings if we have those opportunities? What does it look like every single week? What's the rhythm and what's the culture of prayer and liturgy? That sense of rhythm and ritual is really important. And by doing some of the approaches that we're going to look at today, we can think about, are people getting a variety of experiences? The personal, the individual, the small group, the collective, the whole school, the whole hub, the whole community, the parish. There's lots of different opportunities to interact and to connect when it comes to prayer and liturgy, and the PLD asks us to think about a variety of them. And of course, with variety then, it also asks us to think about creativity. How is what we're doing enjoyable, accessible, engaging, meaningful? And also, how is it moving forward? How are we feeding in a sense of evaluation and monitoring so that we're spotting what we're doing really well and doing more of it, but also reflecting on what we need to develop and working hard to make that better? How are we looking at both what we celebrate and how we grow? And how is that part of the plan of our provision so that it becomes cyclical? It becomes, rather than just something we do every year and then just leave it there, how does it become something that grows with time and with the community that we have? So it's always reflective of who we are and what we do. By understanding how this document can help us meet those ideals, I think we start to see the importance of what this document will be. And we're going to take you through a number of questions, a number of things to think about. If you want to pause the video at any point and stop and then have a discussion as a staff meeting or with a group or an inset day, fantastic, that's the point. And then also we'll point you in the direction of some of the resources that might help you structure and put this together. Again, before we begin and before we dive in, can I just say there isn't a right way to do this. There was a lot of questions. I remember when the PLD was launched saying, oh, can we have an example of what one looks like, please? Because everyone loves an example. But I quite like the fact that there isn't a right answer. There's only your answer. So use this opportunity, use this approach, use the toolkit, use the templates to make something that works for you and is by you. And if we do that, we'll absolutely understand the purpose of the APOP and we'll have something really meaningful and powerful in place for September 2025. Okay, section 1 looks at policy. This can actually be quite a short section, but it's important to show in this document the connections between this document and some of the existing resources that we already have. Now, a separate prayer and liturgy policy or collective worship policy, however you phrased it, is another required document, and many of us will have had that in place for a long time. It's really important that there is actual reference in the prayer and liturgy policy to the APOP and vice versa. So it's really good to include a policy statement at the start of the APOP, stating the part of the policy that this refers to and referencing explicitly that this also works in collaboration with the policy. It also allows then, if the collective worship policy is updated, the APOP still then to be relevant and connected to any of the updated guidance that staff should be using. It's probably really important as well to include any relevant text from the PLD or any relevant text from the diocesan guidance document, Planning and Celebrating Prayer and Liturgy with Young People, in that opening policy statement, just to show that you understand how this connects with the various requirements given to us, both from the PLD as a diocese, but also from the CSI framework and also from policy frameworks as well. So that opening page is really just a few policy statements, as it would be in many other policy documents, just stating the rationale and the different links and the different references that this document will make to other policy documents. If you want to have a bit of time just to have a look at your collective worship policy and think about where in there you can reference and then put in the presence and the importance of an APOP, then absolutely go for it. It's also worth noting as well that your collective worship policies or prayer and liturgy policies should include direct reference to the diocesan guidance, because as of this year, this is now church teaching in our diocese. So Planning and Celebrating Prayer and Liturgy with Young People, this document just here, this is not negotiable. This is our official diocesan approach. This is a bishop's requirement, and as such is something that on a CSI inspection will be inspected as to make sure that we are fully implementing the guidance contained within. So it's really important that that's reflected in policy and also reflected in those opening statements in that policy section 1 of our APOP. Okay, so the next section that we think would probably work really well after the kind of general policy overview is to start to think very generally about your approach to seasonality. You'll remember from the diocesan prayer and liturgy document that season is the first lens that we always think about. And so that's kind of where we've thought to structure and to start the APOP. Again, this is just an approach that will hopefully help you guide you through all those different bits. But the first thing you need to do is think about seasonality. And this isn't just thinking about the obvious liturgical seasons. This isn't actually also getting down to the liturgical calendar. We'll come to that a bit later on. This is where the strategy element comes in. This is where we make deliberate and purposeful decisions about what the different seasons should look like, what their distinct tone and feel should be. And as such, what I would suggest is going through the key liturgical seasons and then asking yourself some key questions about those seasons. They could include, for example, what will the environment look like during this time? What will prayer and liturgy look like in terms of its tone, in terms of its nature? What will our resourcing look like? And what will our key events look like? By making these decisions for each of the key liturgical seasons, we can have, I suppose, a foundational statement of intent, almost like a curriculum intent, but for liturgical seasons, that then we can refer back to in our planning, in our CPD, and in our formation for staff. This will probably be something we don't change that much each year, because actually it's Advent every year and Lent every year. We do the same thing every year, and that's a good thing, because the ideal is that we get to that point where young people and staff and students and the community, they start to think, oh, I love it when it gets to Advent because that's when we do this. We create that sense of familiarity and rhythm throughout the year. Oh, I love Lent because then we'll do this, this and this. These initial statements for your seasons are really good opportunities to make some really meaningful decisions about what does this look like for us. And this is again an area where I think it's absolutely vital to involve not just young people but families, communities, wider stakeholders. And if you're doing this as a kind of working meeting kind of video resource, this is a great time to stop and have a really good think and chat about what these seasons might look like. We need to think about all of the seasons. So obviously starting with the church's liturgical year in Advent, think about the tone, the environment. It doesn't just mean turning everything purple and getting the Advent wreath out. What does the nature of this season feel like? In our prayer and liturgy, are we being quieter? Are we bringing some of the images and kind of some of the motifs of Advent, like darkness to light and the idea of hope? Are we using those Advent themes to help us understand the different scripture that we encounter at this time of year? Advent is a beautiful season, but also thinking about the events we put on, thinking about the way in which we're going to shape our community during Advent. How do we help everyone know that it started? What are those cues going to be? I think there's a really good opportunity there. Now, Christmastide, obviously we don't normally spend a lot of Christmastide in school because we're usually on holiday, but we usually have the Feast of the Epiphany, and we have that then beautiful celebratory season. So it's really important that if you are back for any of Christmastide, we're making sure it's an upbeat celebratory season. Obviously the liturgical colour changes, but then very quickly changes to the green, to that first season of Ordinary Time. And this is where I will say something very important. Ordinary Time is not the bit where we're just waiting for another feast or another season. Ordinary Time is a complete kind of expression in itself. That colour, green, that colour of new life, is a reminder that the church's normal setting should be one of life and of energy and of growth. So in that period of Ordinary Time after Advent and Christmastide, we're very much looking at that ministry of Jesus. We have the baptism of the Lord, we look at Jesus choosing his disciples, we have lots of those stories about